Well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining Fluid Beauty, a webinar brought to you by the Mira Hormone Health Clinic. My goal today is to help you appreciate a basic biomarker of ovulation. So we're just going to give a few minutes for everyone to join. While we're waiting for that, I'm going to post some questions in the chat here. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself and why you chose to attend this session? If you also want to post in the chat where you're from, I'd love to know a little bit about my audience. Let's give a few more minutes for people to join. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. This webinar is going to be recorded for those who are not able to join us, but I thank you for joining us live. And again, the goal for today is to help you appreciate a basic biomarker of your ovulation. And I chose to highlight the beauty of this biomarker. And as a reminder, beauty is something that gives us the quality of pleasure in the mind or of our senses, and is often associated with a sense of harmony because of how the form or the color or the proportions seem to fit together. And I also want to highlight that this biomarker that I hope you'll get enthusiastic about tracking is unique to you, authentic and original to you. A little bit about myself. What qualifies me to speak about cervical fluid and fertility? As a mother and a wife who's interested in hormone health, I am a certified Billings Ovulation Method NFP instructor, a registered holistic nutritionist with a master's in kinesiology, and I also have background in restorative reproductive medicine. You'll get to hear a little bit more about restorative reproductive medicine, or RRM. On the agenda today, I will be reviewing the anatomy and the physiology of the female cycle. So we're going to get a little nerdy. We're going to do a little bit of science, and then I'm going to give you some practical takeaways on how to observe this simple biomarker of ovulation, and then how your observations can be applied to your reproductive health, your fertility goals, perhaps. I am going to post one more chat question here. Not sure if we have Mira users. Love to know a little bit about, if you're a Mira user, how well you understand your data. Thank you so much for those who are answering. So let's dive into our review of our anatomy and physiology. So of course, this is our below the belt reproductive tracts as females. And you can think of it as a very high level or a series of passageways. So the first passageway is our vaginal canal, which is lined with muscle, followed by our cervical canal, which we will be talking more about, and the specific biomarker that comes from the cervical canal. Then we have the body of the uterus and the very important endometrium or uterine lining. And the final passageway, the fallopian tubes or oviducts that extend out from the body of the uterus and just hover, just barely hover over our ovaries. What I do want to point out to you is the ends of the fallopian tube do not touch the ovaries. But upon ovulation, when an egg is released, the fallopian tubes will grasp at that egg and draw it into the tube. And that is actually where all of us became into existence, where conception occurred at the end of the fallopian tubes, or at least one of the tubes. So now we're going to zoom in to the cervical canal that's in between the vaginal canal and the uterus. Cervix actually means neck. So the cervix is the neck to our wombs, okay, or the uterus. And when we take a closer look at this passageway, we're going to notice now that the wall of the cervical canal has these hiding places, if you will. They're called cervical crypts. And within these cervical crypts, there are specialized cells that were discovered to make two main types of fluid or mucus. This was discovered first in the 1950s and 60s by one Dr. Eric Oderblad, who said he suspected the types of several different cervical muci, if you will. And he went on to prove the existence of these types and what their functions were. Okay, this was just an amazing discovery. You're going to hear why. So the two main types, the first type, Dr. Oderblad termed type E because he found that it existed in women where estrogen levels were rising. And the second type, he termed type G, not after the dominant hormone of the time at that time of observation of the mucus, not because of progesterone, but type G for the word gestogenic or promoting pregnancy, because progesterone plays a key role in implantation and the progression of a healthy pregnancy. So these two main types were discovered in the 1950s and 60s. And if you can see very closely, you're going to see that it actually serves a purpose when it comes to the transport of sperm. So let's learn a little more, because now we know that there are other types of cervical fluid. So, as the science likes to progress, and we got new tools to examine the different types of cervical fluid, tools like nuclear magnetic resonance, we got to take a look at the viscosity or the way the fluid dynamic flows within our cervix. So thinking back, viscosity means thickness when we're talking about liquids. So the typical example is that syrup will have a higher viscosity than water. So using tools like nuclear magnetic resonance, scientists then discovered that, okay, beyond the estrogen dominant type E mucus and the progesterone dominant gestogenic type cervical fluid, there actually are a couple other types like the L and S mucus, as well as 3 different types of type G mucus. What did they find that the type S mucus did? Well, it was found that sperm cells were transported and nourished by S mucus, while the L-type mucus was very different. It actually attracted malformed sperm, and all the different types of G mucus were always present in our cervix during the times when we were infertile, okay? During the phases of our cycle when we were infertile. It was also discovered that the G mucus is actually part of our immune system, as it creates a nice plug, keeping pathogens out of the uterus and the fallopian tubes. I will be sharing with you how you can identify when your cervix is producing S, L, and G type mucus a little later. Finally, as late as the 1990s, research on cervical fluid was still continuing, and another type of mucus was discovered. It's called P mucus. And this was characterized by the presence of a mucolytic or liquefying enzyme that actually acted on the S and L type mucus to help make it more watery. Okay, this P mucus actually helped also the sperm to move upwards in the female reproductive tract. Okay. And then finally, the last discovery was in 1993 with the discovery of F-type mucus. And I found this amazing as a mother. It was discovered that this type of mucus was actually produced by remaining fetal cells, cells from the baby after a pregnancy that stick around in the wall of the cervix, since the cervix is the neck of our wombs. So in total, we actually have 8 different types of cervical fluid: E, S, L, P, F, and 3 different types of G mucus, and all of them serve to keep us healthy and to help transmit life when we're in a fertile stage. So what are we looking at here with crystallization patterns of the cervical fluid that we can now see just with light microscopy? Does anybody want to take a guess at if this is estrogenic cervical fluid here or gestogenic progesterone dominant cervical fluid that we're looking at here? You can drop that in the chat. I hope I'm not overwhelming people. I'll tell you, okay? This is all an in-depth close-up look at E-type mucus. Okay, so what we're looking at here is how when we are fertile, our cervix is going to have a fluid that arranges itself with various morphology called fern-like morphology, and how it actually, it's so beautiful, right? I thought this might be appropriate since we're in winter. It can help us to appreciate that even within our own bodies, invisible to us in our cervix. We are mirroring some other patterns in nature, like that of a snowflake even. I find it very lovely. Do you not? And then cervical fluid researchers like myself, they've sat back and they've appreciated how these different types of fluid with their different morphologies, their different shapes, can actually be thought of as a garden within our cervical canal that changes with the various seasons or the phases of our cycle or the seasons of our lives. So hopefully I'm helping you to appreciate that you kind of have a tiny little garden within you, a humble temporary home for valuable seed. So this brings us to my next question, which you may already know the answer to, which is, why do women make this cervical fluid? Here again, we see another representation of all the different types of our fluid, and it's very obvious now. But did you know that human sperm are selected in the cervix? I want you to remember, especially if you are trying to conceive, that we know egg plus sperm equals baby. But the more complete equation is that egg and sperm plus good cervical mucus makes baby. We know now that only morphologically normal, that means sperm with the correct shape, or just slightly abnormal sperm, but only the normal ones or slightly abnormal ones can move through the various types of cervical fluid I've mentioned to you. Some doctors call this actually the filter effect. You can also think of it as a way to have like a natural selection in your cervix. And of course, we also are going to relate it back to our hormones, or rising and falling estrogen and progesterone, gestogenic progesterone, at the various phases of our cycle. Another way to think of this, right? Science has a lot of different interpretations. Hopefully that's producing a little chuckle. All right. So back to the science. What you're looking at right now is histological imaging of the fluid dynamics in a widening cervical canal. And you notice that there's one image that's labeled peak, right? That has the most fluid showing the most fluid flowing through the cervical canal and the widest cervical canal. Okay, so you know that that's what our cervix looks like and how fluid behaves at peak, which is correlated with ovulation, and something women who chart cervical fluid are taught to identify by a certified fertility educator like myself. And we also know that approaching ovulation or peak, we are having our estrogen levels from our follicles in our ovaries rise. Okay? And then what we see also is after peak or after ovulation, the reverse pattern happens and the cervix starts narrowing and it is less capable of having fluid move through it. Okay? So when you take this all in stride, you may also start seeing your cervix as a gatekeeper or a biological valve that's letting sperm in and out, but also protecting the uterus and the fallopian tubes from other things that we don't want going into our upper reproductive tract. And again, if you opt to be one of the many women who work with a certified natural family planning or NFP instructor like myself, you will have a leg up on identifying accurately your peak and the different types of cervical fluid you have during various phases of your cycle. All right. So you've made it through the technical part of this webinar. I'm going to post another question in our poll here, getting a sense of, at this point where we're at. And now I'm going to bring it down to, well, how do you observe your cervical fluid, and what is the application in terms of your hormone health? Give a few minutes. Thank you so much if you've responded to the poll. All right. So to observe, it's actually very easy, okay? The first thing you think about is just the micro habit of in your brain being aware of sensation throughout the day, either as you're walking about and just kind of tuning into the outside of your vaginal canal, which is called the vulva, or for sure, you can be aware of sensation throughout the day at the vulva, the outside of your vaginal canal, when you wipe yourself after you use the bathroom. If you're going to wipe and determine what your cervical fluid is doing, we want you to use flat folded layers of toilet paper and always wipe front to back. Hopefully you already do that. You're going to look every time you wipe at the toilet paper, and if you'd like, you can try to pick up anything you see and do what's called a finger test to determine some other characteristics that will let you know what type of cervical fluid you're making. Keeping in mind that not all methods of observing cervical fluid require a finger test. What we don't want you doing is feeling like you need to put your fingers inside, palpate your cervix, or I've heard of some women who really caught a lot out of working with me. We're in the habit of like digging almost for cervical fluid. Okay, don't want to do that. You don't want to neglect being aware of sensation when you wipe. Okay, that's something that's overlooked. I've seen that happen with women who are tracking cervical fluid using an app that doesn't cue them to be aware of sensation as you're wiping or walking and going about your day. Don't forget, we want to observe throughout the day means after every bathroom visit, including after a bowel movement or BM. That's actually a very key time to observe cervical fluid. And then if you are sexually active after intercourse, there's a technique called seminal fluid elimination that a certified fertility educator trained in cervical fluid observation can tell you about. It simply means you are clearing out the vaginal canal of residual ejaculate from the intercourse so that you are not confounding your cervical fluid observations. Very important as a new observer of cervical fluid, not to neglect the seminal fluid elimination. Okay. What do we observe? Exactly what type of characteristics tell us that we're making sperm-friendly S mucus, L mucus, or gestogenic P-type mucus? It's these three characteristics. Okay? slippery sensation, usually an obvious sensation. Actually, if it's not obvious, it's probably not slippery. But as you wipe your body with flat folded pieces of toilet paper, just tune in and determine, how do I have that slippery sensation? If you do, remember it. Okay. We're also, if you're opting to finger test, going to be looking to see, as you manipulate the fluid between your fingers, if any of it looks clear, like raw egg white, which you may have found online, or partly clear, which some women don't think about, okay? So partly clear still counts as estrogenic, high fertility, sperm-friendly cervical fluid. Clear or partly clear appearance of any part of the strand of cervical fluid if you're choosing to finger test. As you finger test, you can also determine a degree of stretch. And remember, this is a very scientific process. So stretchy is objective. It's a 1-inch degree of stretch, but fear not. You're not going to need to bring a ruler into the bathroom with you. An inch is your finger straight, making an equal sign. So if you're finger testing and you can get your cervical fluid to go this much or more, consider yourself as having rising estrogen levels, possibly approaching ovulation. And if intercourse is occurring, your body will be very good at transporting and extending the life of sperm. Oops. So again, I mentioned this, but you want, again, to think about this main first habit of observing throughout the day, ideally every time you go to the bathroom, especially after a bowel movement. I don't want you thinking about, I've observed once, I'm good for the day, because our cervical fluid can actually change throughout the day. And at the end of the day, you're going to have a method of charting, okay? And there are various methods of charting. If you work with a certified instructor, they'll definitely give you one of their standardized charts. But you want to just track on a chart at the end of each day your most fertile observation of the day. So generally, your most fertile is either a slippery sensation, a clear or partly clear appearance when finger testing, or when finger testing, an observation that is stretchy an inch or more. Those three characteristics, slippery sensation, clear or partly clear, or stretchy greater than an inch, are considered most fertile, most conducive to sperm transport and life extension of sperm. For those of you who are trying to conceive, take this information. So now we're talking about practical application, and share with your partner your most fertile observation of the day. And of course, try on days of slippery, clear or partly clear, or stretchy. Or you know what? Just whenever the mood strikes you. Okay. A key takeaway also, if you are trying to conceive, is to continue your fertility-focused intercourse until 3 days after the last day of high fertility, a high fertility observation. The last day of a slippery, clear or partly clear or stretchy observation. Keep going a few days after that. And the reason why is in our fact box there. Ovulation can occur up to 2 days before or all the way through to 2 days after the last day of particularly a slippery sensation. And this has been shown through ultrasound studies paired with cervical fluid charting. For those of you who are trying to conceive and excited now to be using cervical fluid to time your efforts, or perhaps you are already timing intercourse and thinking, when do I know that I need to see a provider? Well, in general, if you're charting accurately using cervical fluid observation or a urinary hormone device like Mira, and you think you've been doing well with timing for 6 consecutive cycles and still nothing is happening, that's when it's time to seek a provider. And I want to share with you an alternative to IVF that is known as restorative reproductive medicine, or RRM. This is an exciting branch of reproductive medicine because it draws on what a lot of us suspect, in that there's something going on underneath the symptom of the struggle to conceive or carry to term, the symptom of infertility. And so RRM seeks to do a medical evaluation to figure out what are those underlying factors. It's now known through a study that was recently published called the iNest study that looking at the couple, male and female partners, there are up to 6, an average of 4 to 6 actually, an average of 4 to 6 underlying factors that are standing in the way of a couple conceiving naturally. And so if that is your goal, you need to figure out what your underlying factors are, and RRM will help you do that. Cervical fluid charting, okay? Coming back to why we want to appreciate this very simple observation of a fluid within our bodies. If you chart accurately, it can be used as a diagnostic tool for restorative reproductive medicine, okay? RRM providers are trained to look at charts like your Mira chart, if you're using it, or your cervical fluid chart, and they will help you to identify patterns and confirm suspected diagnoses. Here are a few examples of things that are commonly diagnosed through a cervical fluid chart. They all can occur at various stages of a woman's reproductive life. So including if you're coming off of hormonal birth control, if you are postpartum breastfeeding, or if you are perimenopausal, all of these diagnoses, conditions can be diagnosed. And the good news is once they're diagnosed, there is management, there is treatment so that you can feel better, you can improve your reproductive health and your fertility and just your cycle health in general. Okay. The goal is, of course, though, an accurate cycle chart. And if you're going to start doing this or have been already, and you are noticing that you have at least 2 consecutive cycles where there are 3 or less days in a row consecutive of high fertility, high estrogen, slippery, clear or partly clear, or stretchy greater than an inch cervical fluid, less than 3 days consecutive of that type of fluid, you're going to want to note down a couple of ways, non-invasive ways, to try to improve that biomarker, okay? Improve the health of your cervix. So the first tip, if you think you have what's termed limited cervical fluid, again, 3 or fewer consecutive days of type E, if you will, slippery, clear or partly clear, or stretchy an inch or more fluid, Go down the list, okay, and ask yourself if you're doing these things. The least, hopefully the simplest one is to make sure that you are well hydrated, because of course cervical fluid is a hydrogel and requires, like the rest of the fluids in our body, or rest of the mucus produced in other parts of our body, it requires enough water. You also want to make sure that you do not have medications that are known to affect production of cervical fluid. And these include antihistamines, including diphenhydramine, which is in many sleep aids. And if you are having fertility treatments, you want to look at ovulation induction drugs like Clomid or Letrozole that can sometimes reduce cervical fluid. You also want to look at supporting your vaginal microbiome and your cervical health with a probiotic, especially one that has Lactobacillus acidophilus. And it's just good for overall health as well as your production of cervical fluid, to increase intake of foods that contain carotenoids. So carotenoids are found in any yellow or orange fruits and veggies. Load up on those. Good for your immune system, good for your cervical fluid as well. So ask yourself those things first. Make them a habit before you look at these additional strategies, okay? We at Mira Hormone Health Clinic, we definitely want our clients to be doing the least invasive thing first. So please do be consistent with the above strategies before you hit it with one of these suggestions. The Fertile CM product is a supplement, and acetylcysteine, also another supplement. And then with vitamin B6, it is a very high dose. You want to take a look at all your sources of vitamin B6 and make sure you are not exceeding the 500 milligrams per day. And if you can find a sustained release product, or you can just get a product that contains 100 milligrams daily and break it up throughout the day. We also know that decongestion medication, Mucinex, which has the active ingredient called guaifenesin, is effective for increasing mucus secretions all over the body, including in our cervix. If you're going to opt for that strategy, use it only on days of high fertility, approaching ovulation, not every day. But the most important part, especially if you're at the point of these more aggressive strategies, is to make sure you have an accurate cervical fluid chart and consult with a certified fertility awareness-based method FABM instructor or natural family planning instructor, NFP instructor. So coming back, and your head might be swimming now with all of this information, okay? But I want you to know that when you chart and become aware of sensation and appearance of your cervical fluid, you are actually creating a grounding habit, okay? And in doing so, you're giving yourself knowledge of your own body. Observing throughout the day is your first habit. Charting the most fertile observation, again, slippery, clear or partly clear, stretchy, an inch or more. Those are all considered most fertile. Charting those observations at the end of each day, and then looking to vet the accuracy of your observations and your chart by putting a certified instructor on your team. If you feel like you want a little more information on the science of cervical fluid charting, here are some additional resources. NFP, again, stands for Natural Family Planning. And I do want to mention here, especially if you are trying to conceive and have been doing so for a while, this QR code is going to take you to the Mira Preferred Provider page for Reply Fertility. I would say a leading provider of restorative reproductive medicine. To give you a chance to snap that, if you're interested, I'm going to put one more question in our poll here. And that's all I have for you today. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy holiday schedule to learn about a simple biomarker of ovulation that I hope you now appreciate as beautiful, just like all of you are beautiful in your own unique way. And I'm going to turn my attention to the chat now. If any of you want to type questions in the chat box. All right. Well, if there are no questions, I wish you a good rest of the day, and thank you for checking out the Mira Hormone Health Clinic. Bye for now.